Hi YouTube, my name is Jack, and today we are going to talk about novels that capture something of the experience of ecstatic paganism. Being in a pagan mystery cult is a weird thing. It is a unique experience. It's not really comparable to most other things going on in life. And because of that, it can be difficult to find media that feels like it relates to that specific experience. Um, Even witch books, even pagan, like how to do paganism books, often feel like they're missing something essential because so much of at least the kind of paganism that I do, it's experiential. It's about the ecstatic feeling of being in ritual, of feeling a sense of transcendence, which is very hard to put into print. And a common complaint that I have with books about magic or about ritual or about paganism is that they feel kind of dead. They feel kind of lackluster a lot of the time because it's very hard to capture that feeling. But sometimes you can get the feeling in fiction in a way that is better than what shows up in actual pagan books. Not every novel that I read is connected to the experience of ecstatic paganism. In fact, most of them have absolutely nothing to do with it. But every now and then, I find a book that just feels like it gets it. I find a book that I read, and something about that book makes me sort of stop in my tracks and makes me go, oh, this author understands what it's all about. So we're going to talk through 5 novels today that all have something in them that feels like it expresses an experience close to my own experience of ecstatic mystery-based paganism. And we're going to go in alphabetical order by author. So I'm not, you know, expressing a preference between these novels. Some of them are better than others as novels. Not every novel on this list is a great piece of literature, but they all get what the feeling is that my paganism is driving at. And in reading each of these novels, I sort of found myself going, oh yeah, that feels right. We're going to start out with a book that is arguably not a novel, depending on where you want to draw those lines. This is The Golden Ass by Apuleius. I actually talk about this book in Queen of All Witcheries, as I talk about another on this list. This is a fantastic piece of literature. It was written, I want to say, in the 2nd century CE, so late antiquity. And it is simultaneously a sex comedy and a piece of religious propaganda. Uh, it was written by a priest of the initiatory mystery cult of Isis, and the whole thing is told as a Milesian fable, which is a particular narrative structure that involves one overarching plot, sort of a frame tale that is filled in with various smaller vignettes. And the smaller vignettes are almost all stories about sex, right? You have stories about, like, the cheating wife who hides her paramour in a giant vase. You have a lot of stories about people trying to fuck a donkey, but I'll explain why. You have the story of Cupid and Psyche. The original sort of recording of the myth of Cupid and Psyche comes from Apuleius. That's not to say that the myth doesn't necessarily predate him. It might, but our first written record of it is in here. The overarching narrative of the story is that there is a man named Lucius who has an unhealthy interest in witchcraft and the occult. And he spies on a witch at her workings. He sees her transform into an animal, and he decides to try one of her spells. But he gets it wrong, and he accidentally transforms himself into a donkey. Hence, all the stories about people trying to fuck the donkey. And he spends the rest of the novel trying to figure out how to turn himself back. And at the end of the novel, he has a revelation, he has a vision of the goddess Isis, and he discovers that the way for him to be restored to humanity is to be initiated into the cult of Isis. There, behind the comedy, there is this initiatory allegory about moving from the life of a beast to the life of a man through initiation, right? Awakening your more refined soul and kind of stepping out of a blind animal nature and into something more enlightened. It's a fabulous book. It's weird, it's funny, it has literary merit if you care about that. But at the end of the book, really the last chapter is where the religious propaganda comes in. And the vision that Lucius has of the goddess Isis and the message that she communicates to him is just breathtaking, right? She, like, unsurprisingly, for someone who was a priest of the mystery cult of a syncretic great goddess, uh, Apuleius understands what it's like to be in the mystery cult of a syncretic great goddess. And you read this book, and I think for anyone who is involved in initiatory Wicca, reading that last chapter in particular will feel very familiar, because it's very much reflective of the experience of being in Wicca. So that's book number one. Book number two, I also talk about in Queen of All Witcheries. By the way, if you're new to the channel and you don't know what Queen of All Witcheries is, it's one of my books. It's a book about the goddess, the worship of the goddess in the modern world, and various like practitioners and ideas and historical movements that influenced the understanding of the goddess we have today. It's a fabulous book. You should buy it. You should read it. But that is not what we're talking about right now. The second novel on our list is The Sea Priestess by Dion Fortune. And this is a fabulous occult novel, but not actually a very good novel. Like, as a novel, not much happens in this book. It's not actually all that interesting, unless you are looking for the occultism. The story follows a real estate agent in a small town in England who leads a sad and unfulfilling life until he meets a mysterious woman who, spoiler alert, turns out to be the reincarnation of Morgan Le Fay, who was a priestess from Atlantis. Like I say, just as a novel, not great. But he meets a mysterious woman who is engaged in an occult project. And who buys a house on the seaside and turns it into a temple of the goddess. And then she and he work together to perform an occult ritual to restore the power of the goddess in the world, effectively. And the novel culminates in the performance of that ritual, which is an adapted version of a ritual of Dion Fortune's own creation, the Rite of Isis, which she actually did perform for public audiences throughout the 30s. It's a fabulous ritual. It's beautiful. It's breathtaking. It understands the mystery. And if you are looking for something that reflects the feeling of power and the feeling of awe that comes with being in the presence of a divine mystery so much bigger than yourself, you're not going to do much better than the ritual that is described in this novel. And that ritual really makes the rest of the book worth reading, right? Hi, sweetie. There's a lot of casual racism and gender essentialism and sort of other stuff in this book that has really aged very poorly. Reader beware. Sweetie, we're not going to be on the keyboard. Hopefully I still have volume. Yes, I do. Okay. I don't think that those things really ruin the ritual, which is the heart of what makes this book worth reading. But there are times in reading the rest of the book where you're like, oh boy, okay, we're just gonna skip over this chapter. So anyway, the third novel on this list is one that most people nowadays have not heard of. It is The Corn King and the Spring Queen by Naomi Mitchison, which, I mean, right away from the title of the novel, you get a sense of why this might be relevant to my interests. This book really feels like it was written for me specifically. It is about a tribe in Scythia, where the tribe is ruled by a divine god king who is identified as the Corn King. He's understood to have magical power over the corn. He is symbolically married to the Spring Queen, and the two of them together guarantee the turning of the seasons and the health of the crops and so on. Until one day, a Stoic philosopher who was in a shipwreck washes up on their shores and starts to teach them philosophy. And once they start learning philosophy, their magic begins to falter because the philosophical worldview and the magical worldview are fundamentally at odds with one another. So in order to protect their tribe and restore their magic, they travel to Greece, they go to Sparta. There's a whole big political plot, which is historical fiction based on the reign of King Cleomenes III of Sparta, who tried to institute a kind of social equality in Sparta that was, at least for Naomi Mitchison, strongly analogous to like 20th century socialist movements. How fair that comparison is maybe up in the air. But certainly, Mitchison, who was a socialist, saw Cleomenes III as a way of exploring sort of political sentiments about socialism and about equality. So there's a whole like historical fiction political plot that runs through the entire thing as well. It's a weird book. I think it's a really good book, but full disclosure, I think that most people would not enjoy this book as much as I did. Because you have to be like on board with the intersection of Golden Bough style paganism, philosophy, historical fiction, and socialist politics. And that's a very niche set of interests. Happens to be a good niche for me, but maybe not for everyone else. There are multiple moments in this book that feel just like they were written for Wicca in particular, but for ecstatic paganism more generally. There are moments that describe the mysteries of Isis, the mystery cult of Isis, and kind of the experience of that initiation. There's a moment where, near the end of the book, where the witch, who is the main character of the book, is speaking with the spirit of her dead mother. And there's a whole like beautiful meditation on the nature of initiatory transformation and what it is to like go through the dark night of the soul. But probably the scene that is the most evocative in this book is the ritual of plowing Eve, which is right the seasonal festival when they are plowing the fields, and there is a symbolic sacred marriage enacted between the Corn King and the Spring Queen. And the ritual, the description of the ritual just feels like the real thing, right? Like if you've been in that kind of ecstatic seasonal pagan ritual, especially with that sort of framework between two figures who are like a high priestess and a high priest, or like the divine god king that you might find in the Golden Bough. If you're involved in anything like that, you read her plowing Eve ritual and you're like, yeah, this is it. This is the thing. Interestingly enough, Dion Fortune actually name drops Naomi Mitchison in one of her other occult novels, The Goatfoot God, which is only worth reading if you're really diving deep into the Dion Fortune. But in The Goatfoot God, the protagonist of that novel wanders into a bookshop and starts learning about occultism. And this is one of the books that he reads when he is learning about the true mysteries of the occult. So there's a fun piece of trivia for you. The fourth book on our list is one that I talked about in a recent video. It is To a God Unknown by John Steinbeck. This is a beautiful book, and it's tiny. Look how thin it is. You can read this book in an afternoon. Go buy this book right now and read it. It is my favorite Steinbeck. No one ever reads it. No one has ever heard of it. Which, like, understandably, there are other better books by John Steinbeck. East of Eden is a masterpiece. I get why people read East of Eden or The Grapes of Wrath. Like, there's a lot of Steinbeck out there. This is one of his less known novels, and it's just such a gem. And it's so, so pagan. Uh, the plot of this book is that a farmer moves from the East Coast, I think he moves from Massachusetts, to the Sacramento Valley in order to start a farm, because that's how every Steinbeck book starts. And when he arrives at the farm, he begins worshiping a tree at his homestead because he believes that the tree contains the spirit of his dead father. And he starts interacting with the tree as one would with an ancestral spirit or an ancestral god. And then there's just this whole exploration of the ecological relationship between humans and the land, how to express that relationship in religious language. There's a lot, there's so much in here. The scene where he gets married to his wife, they have a marriage ceremony in a church, and it feels kind of dead and lackluster to him. And then when they're on their way back to the farm, they go through a mountain pass, and they have this revelation that, like, the real marriage, the thing that actually makes them married, is crossing that threshold in the natural world and going through the mountains together as man and wife. Where on one side of the mountains, they're two separate people, and then on the other, something has happened, and now they're one. There's so much in this book. I love this book so, so much, and no one has ever heard of it, and it's so good. So please go read this book. I adore it. And yeah, it's beautiful. I've talked previously about a scene toward the end of the book that involves animal sacrifice. The farm has been blighted. There's a drought on the farm, and the main character is on a quest, effectively, to find redemption, to bring back the rain. And he travels to the westernmost point in California, where he meets another man who makes sacrifices every night to the setting sun. And they have a conversation, and the guy who makes the sacrifices says, I could tell you reasons why I do this, but any reason I give you would be a lie. I don't have reasons. I do it because it needs to be done. And I have said before, like, I think there's something just so potent and powerful about that feeling in particular, that we do ritual because we feel that it needs to be done. So, finally, the last book on this list, and probably the best book as far just in terms of the quality of the novel, is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. God, what a book. What an incredible book. The premise of this book is that a group of classics students at a small liberal arts college in Vermont decide to recreate the orgiastic cult of Dionysus, and things go terribly wrong. Which is unsurprising. Like, if you know much about the orgiastic cult of Dionysus, if you've read the Bacchae, you shouldn't be terribly surprised that bad things happened. The book opens with a murder, and then a lot of the rest of the book sort of unfolds and explores why that murder happened and the context behind it and who these people are. And by the end of the book, you realize they're all terrible people. Terrible, terrible people. There's a lot going on in this book that is not just the paganism. There's a lot of commentary on class. There is, like, if you're familiar with classics people, I think there's a lot of inside baseball here that makes this book really special to me, because, like, I went to school with these people. There's a scene pretty early on where the protagonist is meeting the rest of the classics department, and he's sort of being tested by them. And one of them says, well, I suppose you like Homer, do you? And he goes, yeah, I absolutely like Homer. And the other one goes, well, I love Homer. And yep, that's what it's like sometimes with just insufferable people who are involved in a certain kind of academia. And coming from that world, I really appreciate this book. But in particular, as far as the purposes of this video go, the description of the actual experience of the mystery religion, the ecstatic bacchanal that they host. I have never read anything that more closely touched on what it is to be involved in an ecstatic mystery religion. Um, One of the characters at one point is talking to someone who was involved in the ritual. So you have someone who wasn't involved in the ritual talking to someone who was and trying to understand it. And he sort of dismissively says, "Oh, well, and I suppose you saw Dionysus too." And the other guy's like, "Yeah, we did." And the first character is incredulous, and he laughs, and he's like, "What? You mean you saw like a physical man with a goat skin and a thyrsus?" And the other character has this speech, which just like has stayed with me, where he says, if you had never seen the ocean before, and all you had seen of it was a child's drawing in blue crayon, you would think it was ridiculous if someone told you that they had seen the sea. You wouldn't be able to recognize the real thing. And that's what it was like, right? You come up against something that's real, that's so real, that every description of it, every depiction of it that you've ever encountered is just flat and fake, and it's nothing. And how could you possibly describe that to someone else and have them believe it? Yeah, that's it. That's the feeling right there. So this is an incredible book. Donna Tartt did win the Pulitzer, not for this, but for her third novel, The Goldfinch. She's an incredible writer. She's a magnificent novelist. This is a book absolutely worth reading. And again, I've never found a better description of the sort of dizzying, timeless, transcendent feeling of being in ecstatic ritual. So, those are my 5 novels. I am always on the hunt for more novels that get it, for more novels that capture that feeling. So if you have recommendations, please share them in the comments down below. I would love to know what other novels you have that make you feel the way ecstatic paganism makes you feel. The one caveat I'll say is, please, for the love of all things good in this world, do not recommend Paulo Coelho to me. I can't. I can't. But other than that, any recommendations are welcome. So thank you so much for watching. I will wrap this up here, and I'll talk to you sometime soon. Bye.